We resist in our music. We are the revolution.
The people in the West Bank, it's rebirthing the Palestinian community again.
We can do it!
We didn't want their pity.
What did you want?
We wanted to go home.
So welcome to Leeds 6 Palestinian Film Festival. I'm Mariam Zaqout from the festival team, and we are very excited about being our first online festival, so finger crossed that it all goes smoothly. This year we are inviting you to see through the eyes of others. We believe that good art can change how you see things. So we hope you will find the films insightful and maybe challenge your thoughts and emotions regarding the Palestinian people. We've grouped the films into 4 themes, so to help you navigate what is on offer. So you can choose a topic that appeals to you, whether it's the arts, the occupation, children, or the prominent Palestinian director Anna Marie Jasser. Or you can just browse the full program, and we're sure that you will find a film that arouses your curiosity about Palestine. If, as we hope, a film moves you enough to feel you want to act, you can give real, practical, and immediate support by donating to the Medical Aid for Palestinians, and a UK NGO based in Palestine and other refugee camps. So much is needed at the moment with the COVID-19. So you will find details more on our website, and we will be passing on all the profits from the ticket sales to them. Before we get going, there are some people we would like to thank whose generous support has made this online festival possible. To all the people who supported our crowdfunding appeal, thanks to you, we've raised £1,750. Thanks also to the several Leeds City Councillors who made generous donations, as did the Leeds Justice and Peace Commission. To our wonderful team of enthusiastic volunteers who have worked hard on our marketing, and to the professionals who've had enabled us to raise our game and extend our reach. Jude Abbott for our new website, St. Clair for our trailer, and the team on Oxyfire Media, and the team at InPlayer for the technical side of putting us online. And finally, to Katrina Mahmoud for managing our social media. We were delighted that the leader of Leeds City Council, Councillor Judith Blake, agreed to launch our festival. Unfortunately, due to the pressure on her at the moment with the COVID crisis, she's unable to join us in person. We're very sorry about that, but she kindly sent us a statement, which Jane from the festival team will be reading for you.
Thank you, Mariam. I'm very pleased to read a statement on behalf of Councillor Judith Blake, leader of Leeds City Council. I'm delighted and proud that Leeds Palestinian Film Festival is part of our Leeds annual calendar. At the launch of this festival, I would like to welcome those who live or are connected to our wonderful city, and especially to others nationally and internationally who are engaging with this Leeds cultural event for the first time. We hope you will join in our ambition to nurture brilliant diversity and celebrate culturally rich experiences. Leeds is proud of its reputation as a compassionate city that strives for everyone to live in an equal society where human rights and different situations and needs of communities are recognised and understood. This film festival, by shining a light on Palestine, its history, its culture and society, offers a multidimensional view of the lives of Palestinians that we rarely see. The grave threat of the pandemic has highlighted how vulnerable and intertwined our lives and societies are across the globe. It reinforces our need to look outwards, to deepen our knowledge, to connect with others living in other countries as well as those as in our own country and in our own city. The Leeds Palestinian Film Festival offers this unique opportunity. Thank you very much, Councillor Blake.
So thanks again to Councillor Blake and to the support from Leeds City Council toward our festival this year. We are moving on now to delve a bit deeper into the issue of whether art can create change, something we are continually asking ourselves on the festival team. Here to help us develop this conversation, we are so pleased to welcome Emma Alpert, from the Deputy Director of Just Vision, joining us all the way from the United States, and Kholoud Al-Jarma joining us from the Netherlands. A very warm welcome to you both from the festival. I'll hand over and let you say more about yourself as the discussion opens.
Thank you, Mariam, and welcome to the 6th Leeds Palestinian Film Festival. I am Kholoud Al-Jarma. I am Palestinian anthropologist, photographer, and filmmaker. I come from Aida refugee camp near Bethlehem, and I am very excited to be with you, and I'm also excited to introduce our guest, Emma Alpert. Emma is the Deputy Director for Just Vision. And Just Vision, for those who are not familiar with it, is a non-profit organization that utilizes storytelling, media, and public engagement campaigns to highlight Palestinian and Israeli grassroots leaders working to end the occupation. Thank you very much for joining us, Emma. And to start, can you tell us more about yourself and tell us more a bit about Just Vision and what do you do in Just Vision?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Kholoud, and thank you to everyone at the Leeds Palestinian Film Festival for having me. It's really great to be with you all. So Just Vision is a team, as you said, Kholoud, of journalists, storytellers, and filmmakers, as well as human rights advocates. And we are really committed to filling a media gap that we see on the Israeli-Palestinian context. Our work is about putting a spotlight on stories of grassroots leaders, of organizers, of activists, and of everyday people who are striving for justice and equality in their communities. And our work is also journalistic. In addition to our films, we produce journalistic work in Hebrew, in English, and in Arabic. And that is really about holding those in power to account and helping to shift the narrative on this issue so that people can have a more holistic picture of what's taking place on the ground in the region. And increasingly here in the US and internationally as well, all the work that's being done to build a future of freedom, dignity, and equality for Palestinians and Israelis. And in my role as Deputy Director, I help oversee our public engagement, our communications, and I also had the privilege of being the impact producer for Naila and the Uprising, which is our most recent documentary.
Thank you very much. I had the privilege to watch some of the documentaries that are made by Just Vision, and I remember the debates and the conversations that it sparkled when they were shown in different areas in Palestine where I was present. Can you tell us a bit more about why do you think it's important to produce films about Palestine, Israel, and how are these films made by Just Vision contributing to that story that you want to tell?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So, at Just Vision, we really believe that stories have real power in shaping the way that people make sense of the world around them. Stories like the ones in our films inform not only what we understand on a topic like Palestine and Israel, but also the way that we behave and interact with that issue. And we know from doing this work for over 17 years that the stories that get told and shared and gain the most traction on the Israeli-Palestinian context are often deeply misleading. At best, they provide an incomplete narrative, one that tends to focus on instances of violence or top-down political failure. And at worst, they really reinforce dangerous stereotypes and false narratives that leave people less willing to engage on this issue or see the work towards equality and justice as a viable way forward. And so, I think our work and what sets our work apart is a couple of things. One, we focus on character-driven stories that follow real people who are working in their communities for a better future. Our work is deeply researched. We spend months and sometimes years digging into a topic, understanding where the gaps are, considering what perspectives have been left out of the conversation before we even begin production on a film. And that's really important because we know that there are so many perspectives and so many underrepresented stories that are shaping what's happening on the ground and that aren't making it out into the international sphere and even sometimes across Palestinian and Israeli communities as well. And I think the third thing that really sets our work apart and that we really pride ourselves in contributing to the broader field of organizations working on Israel-Palestine is that all of our work, whether it's our films or our journalistic efforts or our other media, they're all coupled with robust public engagement campaigns that are aimed at reaching strategic audiences. Because we know it's not enough just to tell a beautiful story or to create a film. We also have to ensure that those films are getting out in the world, that people are seeing them, that we're reaching students and educators and faith communities and activists who can use the information and stories in our films to fuel their own advocacy and work. We know that it's important that these stories are made visible in the media, in the mainstream media, among policymakers, among those in power, so that they can also grapple with these stories as they are the ones shaping public discourse and policy on this topic. So I think, we have seen over and over again what happens when people engage with a thoughtful, nuanced, well-researched story that includes characters and individuals that they can relate to, that maybe challenge their own perspectives, and push them to think differently on this issue, which we really believe and know is so desperately in need of change.
Thank you. It is really interesting hearing you speak about these stereotypes that people share because of the public media or what mass media produces about Palestine, Israel, about the conflict in general. Can you share with us a bit more about the types of stereotypes that you try to tackle and how films like Budrus, for example, or Naila and the Uprising challenge these stereotypes?
Yeah, so, I think there's a whole host of problematic stereotypes that are used to characterize and frankly discredit Palestinian communities and Palestinian organizing, whether that's related to a false insistence that Palestinians are inherently violent or tropes around Palestinian and Arab women more broadly as being oppressed or disenfranchised in some way. And, to us, the reason these stereotypes are so dangerous and pervasive is that they serve to delegitimize entire communities and populations and delegitimize their claim to self-determination, to equal rights, to equal access and opportunity to safety and education and water and mobility and all of these things that are not available to so many Palestinian communities. And I think that's one of the reasons why we focus our stories on individuals, on people that are relatable, often women, as in Budrus and Naila and the Uprising, and others, grassroots organizers, religious leaders, and so on, who can stand in direct contrast to these problematic stereotypes. In Budrus, we see a 15-year-old young Palestinian woman, Iltizam, and she mobilizes women in her village to take part in a sustained nonviolent campaign to move the course of the Israeli wall that's being built on the village lands. and she works alongside the men in her community. We see people from all different political persuasions, religious backgrounds coming together in a campaign that's ultimately successful in changing the course of the wall, in saving the village lands and preserving the community. And, you know, I think seeing a young woman in this role, it's not only challenging stereotypes that international audiences sometimes hold, it's also providing role models for young Palestinian women and men who can grow up and see this story and see themselves in that story, because stereotypes aren't only dangerous for, you know, the broader international media, they also reflect back on communities. And so that is why we work in Palestinian communities, in Israeli communities, and in American and international communities, because we know that it takes that cross-context, broad engagement and strategy in order to actually shift the conversation. I think, you know, similarly on Naila and the Uprising, we chronicle a story from the first Intifada that challenges a misunderstanding of the movement. Even the word Intifada for so many people conjures a lot of imagery of violence, of Molotov cocktails, of young men throwing stones at tanks. And the reality is that that wasn't what the first Intifada really looked like. So this film is about challenging those false images and creating a more holistic narrative, a more holistic visual archive of what the movement really looked like, which is marches and sit-ins and boycott and parallel institution building, like underground schools and medical facilities being built when those that were previously run by Israelis were shut down during the first Intifada. And again, we see women at the helm, and we see women that are, you know, participating at all levels of society, at all levels of a movement. They're both working towards self-determination at, you know, for Palestinians more broadly, and they're working to challenge patriarchy within their own society. And it's complex, and it's able to hold all of those things together, which I think is really important, because I think one of the most dangerous stereotypes that people take away on this issue is that there is one monolith that is Palestinians and one monolith that is Israelis. And we know that that's not true. And there's a lot of complexity and nuance within each of these communities that is important to hold and to understand as we think about what people are asking for and demanding in terms of building a better future for themselves and their families.
Absolutely. And I really find it very inspiring when you said that you're trying to cover or follow the stories of real people. And the power of storytelling itself is very important, not only for filmmakers, but for media in general and what we produce in the media. Can you tell us more about how do you see the role of storytelling or the power of storytelling in a conflict setting, for example, as Palestine and Israel?
Sure. I think, you know, storytelling, as I said, you know, it's a very powerful medium. We are inherently storytellers, all of us, the way that we move about the world, the way that we understand ourselves, the way that we understand the context in which we're operating. And the media, particularly today, has so much power and weight in what determines what sort of the dominant narrative is, or what the dominant narrative becomes. And, you know, we see our work as not necessarily counter to those dominant narratives, but as a way to fill in the gaps, as a way to create a deeper level of understanding, and bring in the voices of those who don't have access to the media in the same way, right? And we see this, you know, this is an issue in Israel-Palestine, but this is an issue everywhere in the world. Any movement, any movement for liberation, any struggle for justice has certain characters and individuals and communities that rise to the top and that are consistently interviewed in the media. And oftentimes they're men, and oftentimes they're people with power or influence already. And, you know, we believe that it's important for people to see themselves in the stories that are defining their movement and their struggle. And so we work we work really closely with community organizers, with organizations in the field in Israel and Palestine to identify, what are the threads that you're following that you aren't seeing in the media around you. And, each of the contexts in which we work have very complex media environments and very different ways that stories need to be understood and told to have the traction and to have the impact that we want to have. But, when it comes to documentary film, I think one of the beautiful things about it is it gives people a chance to sit with a story, with a character, with a group of individuals for a full hour, for an hour and a half. And you, in that space, in that time, you can sort of suspend your own prejudices, perspectives, whatever you're bringing into this issue, and just be with another person. See what it's like to live their life, see their experiences. And I think we've really seen, with Naila and the Uprising, for example, so many communities around the globe, particularly women, whether those are women in the US, in Ferguson, where we showed the film here, where I am, or in Nigeria, where we showed the film with a group of organizers there. There's so many people who see themselves in the story of Naila and the other women who were organizing during the First Intifada, who see the challenges that they faced as mothers, as women, as individuals, struggling in a complex political environment. And that matters. When people can see themselves, we know representation matters. We see it time and time again. And for young Palestinians in Gaza to be able to watch this film and say, I didn't know that my aunt or my mom or my grandmother was participating in this way. And to, that creates a sense of possibility, that creates a sense of connection and inspiration. And it also creates an understanding of, what are the lessons we can take away from these stories to inform our organizing today, or to inform what we need to do today, both the good and the bad, right? So there's so much, we tend to focus on how people can be inspired by these stories, but there also are cautionary tales and lessons for people to learn about what doesn't work, or what to be careful of and aware of as we continue to organize. What's so, hard, I think, on this issue in particular is that we, in Naila and the Uprising, look at a movement that took place over 30 years ago. And yet so many of the exact same demands and needs are still lacking today. And people are still organizing for the same access to those rights. So there is a lot of continuity, I think, in understanding how a story can be told, from 30 years ago to today, and what that means, and what perspective that gives us in looking at something that happened, in the past, and linking it to how it remains resonant today.
Absolutely. And I think it's also different when one watches a documentary like that alone and reflects on a personal level, and when you watch it with a group of people. Because I remember watching Budrus with a group of young people in Aida camp, and it sparkled a lot of conversation after, and a debate that started between these young people. So, and you must have done this tens or hundreds of times with traveling with the film and showing it to different communities. So can you tell us a bit more about that? Any memorable moments or conversations that either Budrus or Naila and the Intifada have sparkled among the audience?
Definitely. So, as you said, we've had the opportunity to share these films hundreds of times with tens of thousands of audience members. And I think one of the stories that stands out the most to me is when we premiered Naila and the Uprising in New York. It was at Doc NYC, which is one of the largest documentary film festivals in the US. And we had Naila with us in New York, and we had Zahira Kamal, one of the other protagonists, with us in New York. And, I think for Naila, it doesn't necessarily come across in the film, but she is she was reluctant to tell her story. This is you hear it from her son in the film. This is a painful story. This is a painful experience for her in many ways. And so many of the women who we interviewed for Naila and the Uprising had never told their story and weren't sure what the value was in that, didn't even recognize what they did as activism, because no one had asked them, because no one had framed it that way for them. And I think seeing, up to the last moment before the film premiered, Naila was unsure of how it would be received, of how, what would be the power of it. And yet there we were in a packed theater, standing room only, 400 people giving a standing ovation as the film finished. And Naila took to the stage to share more about the experience of making the film. And I think the way that she lit up, the way that you could see, me telling my personal story and people seeing it on the big screen like that, it makes a difference. It helps people understand. And we've had so many people tell us, I finally understand what is underneath, what is at the root of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that I hear so much about through Naila's story. And, that is so powerful to hear from audience members who can relate to the story, who are moved by the story, even those that feel deeply challenged by the story can say, I never, we've screened this film with audiences in Israel, and we had one older man who served in the Israeli army during the time of the First Intifada. And I think for him to see, what was on the other side of the military incursions that he was a part of, what did that community look like and what was going on for them? He was deeply moved and deeply questioning what is the role of a military in a sustained occupation like the one in Israel-Palestine. So, we have seen the ways that this film touches people all across the world. And I think the thing that's so powerful is, as I mentioned before, the way that the story remains so resonant for people. When we were creating Naila and the Uprising, we released the film right after Donald Trump was elected, right after the Me Too movement launched. And there was this groundswell of understanding that women's stories needed to be front and center, that women needed to be able to tell their own stories. We didn't know that environment we would be releasing this film into. And yet, because of the timing, it had so much more traction and ability to connect with audiences around the globe. And I think that is really to see the way that activists and organizers, many of whom are understandably exhausted and even demoralized sometimes at the fact that people are still fighting for the same rights, see a film like Naila and the Uprising and feel energized by it and say, if they could do it, if the people who came before me could organize in this way under all of the restrictions that they had, I can do it too. So I think, we are continuously inspired by the way that audiences can engage this film. I'll just share one more story around when we shared the film. We've shared the film with a lot of American Jewish populations and organizations. And for a lot of groups, this is a difficult story. And the way in which the First Intifada is portrayed and challenges their own assumptions of what the First Intifada was, or maybe what they've been told, to see people open up, to see people say, oh, I understand why there's so much frustration, or, I understand now the Oslo Accords in a totally different light. It wasn't necessarily the end all be all of, solving this conflict. It was actually in many ways a deeply problematic political process that left women out, that left grassroots organizers out. And that helps us understand how we got to where we are today and what people are still calling for. So I think, there's tons of more inspiring stories that I could share. But the main thing being, we see the way that a powerful story like Naila's can connect with individuals and move them to take action, move them to understand this issue in a different way. And that is the power of our films.
Thank you very much. I also wanted to know more from you about how different it is to show these films in big international film festivals, like you mentioned you showed it in New York, for example, versus small community gatherings, for example, or in grassroots levels organizations. What is the difference, and why do you try to kind of reach both or multiple even platforms to show these films?
Yeah, I think, the value, we see our work operating on multiple levels, right? And we know that in order for there to be long-term systemic change, which is needed, that requires reaching people where they are, right? So we need political leaders and people with influence in Washington and also in Israel and Palestine to see these stories, to understand them, to engage with them. We also need youth in refugee camps and in schools and in summer camps to be exposed to this story early and learn from it early on, and have it be included as part of their education and information that they get. We do a lot of work with university students because universities are a huge place where there's an exchange of ideas and conversation and engagement and activism on this issue. So we want this film to be part of university libraries, to be included as part of the syllabi for professors that are teaching on this topic. And I think there's value in all of those levels. And part of what makes Just Vision's work impactful and frankly, the field of documentary films that are working towards social change, and what people are really understanding now is, as I said before, it's not just enough to make a beautiful, moving film. You have to engage people. You have to, with all of our films, we build deeply researched discussion guides in English, in Hebrew, and in Arabic, so that people have tools to follow up on once they see the film. What can I do? What can I know more about? Giving people access to a variety of different resources is really valuable. But I think to your question around audience, I mean, I've been in screenings with this film with 7 people sitting around a projector, in the West Bank, and I've been in a hall with 500 people watching this film in a movie theater, and it's very different, obviously, the energy, but the learning is no less significant in that small room. And in some ways, it's all the more powerful for people. We've had Rula Salame, my colleague in Palestine who leads our outreach there. She has told us, especially with Naila and Uprising, that so many of our screenings, the conversation, the Q&A afterwards is actually longer than the film itself, because what we see is people wanting to share their own stories, and the film has really become, which is what we hoped, a way of sparking conversation and getting people to say, well, this was my experience of the first Intifada, and to open up about it for the first time. And it's really interesting, actually, in particular in the intergenerational dynamics that come up, because again, because of the Oslo Accords, because of the fact that today the occupation is in many ways so much more entrenched, and looking back on this time can be very painful for people who participated at the time, because there's a sense of failure. There's a sense of we didn't achieve our goals. Many older people who were participating in the first Intifada don't talk about it. And this film has helped to open that up, and so that young people can ask questions and learn from those who came before them. And so that, those who were living through this at the time can speak about and share their experiences. And that's, I think, probably one of the most powerful and heartening components of the film. I think, Naila is the first person to say, my story is one of many. There could be a documentary film made about thousands of people who participated during the first Intifada. And so we really take that to heart when we're having those post-screening conversations in Palestinian communities in particular.
Absolutely, and I've witnessed it, so I know how it sparkles a lot of conversation after the screen. My next question is really not about the content of the films, but more about the obstacles that you face when you're making a movie about Palestine, for example. What kind, I remember with Budrus, for example, there was filming during the demonstrations. And can you tell more about what kinds of obstacles you faced, either logistically or on the ground?
Sure. Yeah. I think there's a lot of obstacles, as you mentioned, starting kind of at the structural level. And this is one of the reasons why I think Just Vision was founded and needs to exist, is because just generally reporting on getting access to what's happening in Palestinian communities, particularly in areas that are under occupation, it's challenging physically, getting through checkpoints, getting through security, all of those components, not to mention the dangers and fears of people filming and being at demonstrations and situations that are highly militarized. So there are, a lot of physical barriers to that. There are also other barriers that just have to do with telling the story of nonviolent activism. It's much harder to do that than it is to tell a story that kind of reports on just incident by incident, following when there's violence or something happens. So it takes a lot of time and commitment and being deeply embedded in communities where you can sit with people and talk with them and live through what they're living through in order to tell a truly nuanced story. And so I think that's another obstacle, and why we don't see more long form work on the Israeli-Palestinian context, or, one of the challenges to it is being able to be there and follow through all the moments, even those that seem mundane. And then I think, the third obstacle is really more of a discursive one, more of a political one, in which it's challenging for Palestinians to feel the burden of having to tell the entire story of Palestine and the occupation in a film. There's the complicated identity politics all across this issue. There's the self-censorship and censorship of, fear of speaking out in certain ways against political parties or against your own government or what have you. And I think, again, we're in a very lucky position because we're a team. We have a whole organization behind us. We have Palestinians and Israelis and Americans and Brazilians all, together working to tell these stories from all these different perspectives. And that in some ways allows us to tell a more nuanced story. So, the challenges are immense. And I think just, because we are at a film festival, one of the things that is really, that we're always thinking about is how do we get these stories to go beyond the film festivals and, beyond the audiences that want to see and hear this story. And so how do we work with mainstream media? How do we distribute the films on major broadcasts? With Naila and Uprising, we were really lucky to have the opportunity to have the film be part of a series on PBS with our partners at Fork Films called Women, War, and Peace. And that allowed us to reach millions of audiences in living rooms across the US in a way that so many documentary films on Palestine and on Israel don't make it into that space because of concerns around the it's a political minefield in many ways. So I think there's all kinds of issues around distribution and how these stories have limited distribution, and we are continuously working to challenge that. And that is why we start by making sure that our films are seen on, at film festivals and covered by major news outlets, because that gives credibility and it helps elevate the films to a place where then they can be seen by leaders and adopted at the university level and all of these spaces that we're able to get into because we have access at different points. And that is a real challenge and takes a lot of work. You can talk to any independent filmmaker who is participating in this festival, and I'm sure they could share their own stories and echo that.
Thank you so much, Emma, for giving us your time. And before we end, I would like to ask if you have any final message to the people watching us.
You know, I would love to, I think for anyone who's watching this, share these stories that you are interacting with and getting to watch at the Leeds Palestine Film Festival. They are important and they matter. Share with your friends. You know, I always tell the story of how I came to work at Just Vision, which is, you know, I'm one of 8 kids in my family. I grew up in a Christian household with a very vague idea of what Israel-Palestine was. And when I traveled there for the first time as a young college student and came back to tell the stories of what I had witnessed, what I had experienced, how different Palestine and Palestinians and Israelis were from what I had been told, from what I had understood from the media, and saw the way that my family changed, that's what this work is, right? And to do that through films, to share these stories, they make an immense difference, and they can change the way that people think about and interact on this topic. So I just encourage you all to, you know, be responsible in the media that you're consuming and always question where you're getting information and, you know, enjoy these stories and share them with the people around you.
Absolutely. And I join my voice to yours, and I hope that people would enjoy the films and also share the stories with others around them. Thank you so much, Emma, for your time and for being with us. And I hope you stay safe and all the best with your work and with Just Vision.
Thank you so much, Kholoud. Same to you.
Huge thanks to both of you for that very thought-provoking discussion. It has really whet my appetite to plunge into the films, and hopefully all of yours too. Goodbye from me and enjoy your viewing.